This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting from inside the COP. That's inside COP21, Conference of Parties of the UN Climate Change Summit. As we turn now to the latest on negotiations here at the summit in Paris, Secretary of State John Kerry is, as we speak, delivering a major speech.
Now, I know there are still a few who insist that climate change is one big hoax, even a political conspiracy. My friends, these people are so out of touch with science that they believe rising sea levels don't matter because, in their view, the extra water is just going to spill out over the sides of a flat Earth. They're wrong, obviously. For the benefit of those who may still question the 97% of peer-reviewed studies on climate change, let me just underscore. You don't need to be a scientist to know that the Earth is round, that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and that gravity is the reason that objects fall to the ground. You could pick 100 different examples of simple things that happen every day that reflect science and determinations of science. And you don't need to be a scientist, as some assert, to see that our planet is already changing in real, measurable, and alarming ways.
That's John Kerry, Secretary of State of the United States, speaking here at the UN Climate Summit. As we broadcast, he's promised the U.S. would double its climate aid to $800 million a year by 2020 to help poorer nations prepare for the impact of climate change. Meanwhile, The Guardian's revealed the United States, European nations, as well as 79 African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries have joined together to form a new negotiating bloc. The group reportedly first met in secret 6 months ago. Notably, the bloc does not include China or India. U.S. Chief Negotiator Todd Stern has dubbed the new bloc the High Ambition Coalition. To make sense of where the talks stand right now, we're joined by Bangladeshi climate scientist Saleemul Huq. He's with the International Institute for Environment and Development in London and the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh. Welcome back to Democracy Now! We talk to you every summit, every December. Saleemul Huq, the significance of what Secretary of State John Kerry has just promised.
Well, I think Secretary of State John Kerry is an extremely knowledgeable person. I had the privilege of meeting him in Kyoto, and he's been following the negotiations and the climate change issue for very many years. And he gave what I thought was a masterclass in explaining the problem of climate change and the reason why we all have to work together. So I found it a very encouraging speech.
Talk about how climate change has affected Bangladesh, your country.
Bangladesh, my country, is a country of 150 million people living in less than 150,000 square kilometers, which makes it one of the densest as well as one of the poorest countries in the world, and also one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And so we are facing problems of climate change, from flooding to cyclones to even droughts, as we speak. And millions of people in Bangladesh are facing it. But we are also tackling it. We are not sitting idle. We are facing, and we require assistance and support from the rest of the world.
So what does this high ambition group mean that's led by the United States, does not include China and India, if the U.S. says this cannot be binding, what comes out of Paris?
Well, we regard whatever comes out of Paris as an agreement by the leaders of the world, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, as binding as we need it to be. If they agree to do something, then we expect them to abide by what they agreed to do. And we're hoping that the high ambition coalition that they've dubbed themselves is indeed high ambition.
Let me get a comment from you, from Friends of the Earth. This is the group's president, Eric Pica.
Two different sides, right? In the United States, the U.S. negotiating team is, preserving President Obama's legacy. They're pushing for an aggressive deal. They're taking on China. They're taking on India. But what the reality is within the negotiating center is that the United States is undermining all of those key points within a negotiating framework or agreement that provides for that moral responsibility. So instead of being the moral shining light that the United States has always proclaimed it is on the international world, we're using backdoor negotiations and behind-the-scenes negotiations to surreptitiously undermine every instance where it proclaims our moral responsibility to be a leader and to do more than the rest of the world.
That is Eric Pica of Friends of the Earth. Do you share his assessment of the role of the United States, Saleemul Huq?
No, I don't. I think the United States is negotiating in good faith here. The announcement of the $800 million to support adaptation in the poorest, most vulnerable countries is a good sign. It's not enough. We know that everything that is being said here is never going to be enough to keep the temperature down to 1.5 degrees unless everybody steps up. And we believe everybody wants to do that. We just have to push them to make that happen.
What has to happen in this next 2 days?
From my point of view, I need to see that the long-term goal is 1.5 degrees centigrade and not 2 degrees, because the difference between those two is roughly 100 million poor people on planet Earth, whom we will be writing off if we accept a 2-degree target or continue to keep the 2-degree target, which we have at the moment. That's number one. Number two is financing the poorest countries, the most vulnerable countries, to the tune that has been agreed in the tens of billions of dollars. They're asking for 50% of the $100 billion to be allocated to adaptation in the poorest and most vulnerable countries to help them cope with the impacts. And number three is to have a very rapid decarbonization and rapid increase in renewable energy worldwide.
I want to thank you very much, Saleemul Huq, climate scientist at the International Institute for Environment and Development in London and director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh. And that does Hi, I'm Amy Goodman. I want to thank you for tuning in to Democracy Now! We are so grateful to our fans and followers for being a part of the daily conversation. By choosing a news source that's committed to the truth, you're carrying the message of independent media, reaching hundreds of thousands of people every day. In these times of war and elections, we need a media not sponsored by corporations that profit from war, but a media that's truly independent, funded by you. Democracy Now! Is not paid for by the weapons manufacturers, the insurance industry, or the oil, gas, coal, or nuclear companies. We don't take advertising or corporate underwriting dollars. That means we rely on your donations to make our daily independent news hour possible. We need your support today to keep bringing you the hard-hitting, in-depth reporting you've come to expect 5 days a week. Visit democracynow.org, or you can call 888-999-3877. That's 888-999-3877 to make your holiday gift to Democracy Now! Today. Thanks so much for sharing Democracy Now! Stories all year long.